Good morning and welcome to the Full Scottish and Broadcasting Scotland. I'm joined today by journalist and commentator Kevin McKenna and the Scottish Green Party Co-Convener and their lead candidate for the EU elections in the Green Party. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
How are you this morning? All right?
Yeah, good.
Very well.
That's good. So we'll kick off by just having a wee look at what's happening down south in Westminster. We had Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, earlier this week warning that any successor to Theresa May calling an early general election would risk handing the keys over to number 10 to Jeremy Corbyn and basically killing Brexit altogether. He said that an early GE would be an absolute disaster. Is it even feasible that there will be an early general election, do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, it's got to be one of the main items on the increasingly crowded Brexit menu. It seems every other week like there's another scenario, and when you hear seasoned, experienced BBC political journalists who've been in and around Westminster for years, who quite palpably in front of the television cameras are like flummoxed when they're asked questions about the next scenario, but I think with if Boris Johnson gets the leadership, let's say, and Tory internal polling is showing that he is very popular amongst not just members of the 1922 committee, but in the constituencies. So no matter how much spinning there will be against him, which we're already getting from within the Tory party, because there's some of the moderates there who are as scared about him becoming leader as we are, he still has to be regarded as one of the favourites, and it's his sheer unpredictability and lust for power, which he could say, yeah, general election, I think I'm going to do it, and it will immediately underpin his authority very early on in the Premiership if he was to get it. And it might be a very scary prospect. I think it's quite a real prospect of him being in charge of what he could do.
We'll come back and talk about Boris in a minute. In terms of why we would think that Jeremy Corbyn would get the keys to number 10, surely he has no alternative to offer compared with he's sat on the fence, or he's agreed with the Tories. Why would people vote for Jeremy Corbyn, do you think?
I think there is something that Corbyn, if he stuck to his principles and his convictions that he's had over the last 40 years, there is an attractive offer there for many people, an alternative to Tory austerity, an alternative to the kind of controlling type of politics that we've seen, and controlling yet incompetent politics we've seen from Theresa May and her government. But I think, I know we might come on to talking about it later on if we touch on the Australian elections. What we've seen though with Corbyn over the last few years is his utter failure to stick to his principles and stick to his convictions and tack to the centre to try and hoover up some more support, and that's destroying him. It's destroying the Labour Party, and I don't see them as a credible alternative. I mean, it's part of the problem of the two-party system we have in the UK, a problem of the lack of proportionality in voting systems for Westminster. And I think if we are really serious as a country, and I'm talking about the UK as a whole here, if we're serious about moving away from this gridlock in our politics, this gridlock of incompetence, of failed leadership, of failure to produce something even remotely resembling a roadmap for a future, then we need to change our voting system, and we need to change our politics and the way we do politics. And I don't see either the Conservatives or the Labour Party offering us any kind of alternative there.
And because of this, the kind of gladiatorial aspect of the two Goliaths fighting each other in this system, it means that somebody like Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, who has got authentic socialist values, who has never changed them since he was first elected in 1983, but because of that system, and also because 90% of the UK press, especially in England, are right-wing, are owned by multi-millionaires, billionaires, who were the friends and probably chums of Tory ministers at Eton and Oxford. He's up against that. Now he's got a massive mandate. He's had twice, not only with his election but also with the challenge against him, a massive mandate to be leader of the party. But he feels, as you were saying, he has to tack to the centre because there's the press, because there's in my opinion, although the Labour Party has been unwise or it has been clumsy in how it has treated the anti-Semitism aspects among some of its supporters, nevertheless, because of that clumsiness, it has allowed the red tops and the right-wing red tops to make so-called anti-Semitism the focus and beyond everything else. And he thinks that in order to combat that, he has to tack to the centre. But Jeremy Corbyn is never going, no matter how much makeup you put him, you could put him in an Armani suit, you could have him coming out of Harrods. He's never going to look like a centrist, does he?
No.
Be what you are. That's what people elected you for. And with Brexit, who's advising them? Because 2 years down the line, could you tell me really what their consistent position is?
And I mean, I've been doing hustings this week for the European elections with Labour candidates and Labour Party members, and they don't actually know what to say when asked that, what is your position, because there's been very, very poor, if any, leadership within the party, and I think it's leaving everybody confused, and as you say, it's undermining any sense of credibility that the public can have in not just the Labour Party but in politics more generally, and it's undermining trust in our political system, which is a problem for our democracy.
Yeah. And I mean, in days gone by, there was obviously a clear distinction between Tories and Labour, and you talked there, Kevin, about them tacking to the centre. Do you think that's one of the main reasons for the demise in the Labour Party in Scotland?
Well, yeah, it is. I thought that their tactics and their strategy during the first independence referendum were frankly a disgrace, and I say that as a Labour supporter whose family have always voted Labour, and I'm not saying that they had to become very pro-independence, but there was a way of disengaging themselves from the Conservatives, not being seen to wrapping themselves in the Union Jack, and giving a plausible riposte to the independence offering, such as, we should stay in the UK because we're all in it together. All the working class communities north and south of the border have got common problems, and only by working together across the border can we do that. That's got to be bigger than independence. That was an offering they could have given. But it didn't, because they were standing on platforms of the Tories. So that was the first thing. Second thing is, like, when you get Kezia Dugdale becoming a professor in this, John Smith Centre for Elite, post-political failed politicians, managerialism, let's all be nice to each other, let's go to the centre and have a lovely time, slap everyone in the back and be friendly and nice, and speak nicely, and no swearing, no people losing their temper. That's the sort of politics the Tories love, because the Tories want everybody to be well behaved. That's why we get the BBC gives us the royal family and royal births, and we have military excursions if things are flagging, and we have Olympic games here and there, just to give this this kind of veneer of we're all in it together, and what actually working class disadvantaged people, why a lot of them voted for independence in 2014 was because they thought, I'm not entirely sure about Scottish independence, but things can't be any worse.
Yeah.
And
I think built into that the elements of Scottish politics that have learnt the worst features of Westminster politics, that kind of tribalism, that deep-seated tribalism, that only one party is entitled to have any good ideas, and that's the very antithesis of, I believe, I genuinely believe what the Scottish Parliament was set up to do. moving away, I think we still have to work very hard to challenge that and move away from that entrenched, entitled, tribal approach to our politics. It's not what the vast majority of Scots want.
The Conservatives are the most tribal party in Europe. They've been tribal since they were started. They've been tribal since Walpole, and their tribalism is narrower than anything else because it basically represents the interests of
the elite.
Top 1%, and they have never shifted from that. And they talk about, the Scottish Tories, Ruth Davidson, accusing the SNP and nationalists or independent sporting parties like the Greens of tribalism. And going, no, you are the most tribal, divisive, nasty party there has ever been. And I can actually trust Tory MPs who are consistent with that. I think, well, I'm completely disagree with
they sit,
I don't, but people who then try and pretend that they're cuddly and that they're quite inclusive, and Ruth's sitting in a Sherman tank and her kind of paintball territorial army fatigues. Don't know how that's supposed to kind of convey inclusiveness, but nevertheless she still does.
Yeah. I mean, turning to Theresa May, obviously she'll set out her timetable for departing following next month's attempt to get her Brexit withdrawal deal passed in the Commons. Maggie, do you think we can actually believe anything she says? Will she go? Because she seems a bit like Teflon, to be honest.
I mean, who knows? I think as Kevin said earlier, there's a growing anger and sort of desire in her own party to get rid of her and to replace her with who knows what. But I think that it speaks to a deep incompetence within the Tories and a deep inability to listen. To listen to anybody. The fact that what we hear about the negotiations between Conservatives and Labour, they didn't go anywhere, it's because she's utterly incapable of working with anybody, utterly incapable of putting her briefing paper down for 2 minutes and actually listening to the person on the other side of the table talk to her like a human being. There seems to be that complete inability to disengage the robot. This is what I have in front of me to say, and so this is what I'm going to say. And actually, well, what is it you think? How can we find a compromise in any of this? I haven't seen one example of compromise from Theresa May when she was, before she was Prime Minister, when she was in charge of the Home Office and established, she's the architect of the hostile environment we've got, and people were telling her, no, this is not the way to do things, no, this is going to end in disaster, no, this is going to end in egg on your face, quite frankly. Look at Windrush, look at a whole range of different scandals we've had coming out of the Home Office. And she's just utterly incompetent, utterly incapable of listening to anybody. And I think that quality in itself should disqualify anybody from leadership. There has to be the ability to listen, to engage, disagree robustly by all means, but at least listen and engage and talk to people as if they actually have something to offer, not just, this is my sheet of paper, this is what I've been told to say, I'm not going to deviate, because that's what she does, and that's not leadership.
So what do you think, Kevin, in terms of the outcome of her vote? Is she going to succeed in getting her vote through Parliament?
Can't see it. There was a senior Tory on the BBC the other day. What was his name? Welsh Tory backbencher. I can't remember his name. But he and his quotes are reported, which makes it even more regrettable that I can't remember his name. Where he said that no matter how much you watch the Titanic movie, the outcome's always the same. And and immediately everybody gets it. So that's what she's coming back for the fifth time. Yeah. She's got no chance, absolutely no chance of this getting through, because the Labour Party, for the first time that I can remember in the last 2 years, the top three people in the Labour Party were all saying the same thing about having to break off negotiations, although they seem to have shifted their position yet again, haven't they? Saying that they are. Did you get? They're going for they're now backing a people's vote.
Yes,
aren't they?
Yeah. Well, we think so.
A year after everybody else wanted them to.
Who knows?
They slipped that one in. I didn't. I thought need to double check that. So she's got no chance. And you know, she visited. That was the day after she had her visit to the 1922 committee, who more or less, I think, told her, we want a timetable. You know, after, you know, unless you can get this vote through, and we don't think you can, the very next day we must have a date for you leaving. And presumably that would have to be approved, because she could, you know, as you were saying, she could say, yes, okay, I'll give you a date. And the date could be like Christmas Eve or something. Because this is a woman that gives you the impression that week to week she's trying to come up with, she starts the week thinking, if I get to the end of the week, I'm doing well, and I'll use any artifice that I can to get to Friday. And so just because she's said to the 1922 committee, I'll give you a timetable, in itself she could say, yeah, here's the timetable, but it's quite elastic. It's going to be December, and they'll say, well, we need something a lot sooner than that. She will still think that she will be able to use something will happen that will allow others to take their eye off her situation. She's I was going to say, have I ever felt sorry for her? I don't think so. It's desperation, it's hanging on to power for power's sake. There was an article written by Matthew, I'll keep this quick because I know there's other things to talk about, but Matthew Parris, the former Conservative MP and journalist, well, he is still a journalist, a very good journalist who writes a column in the Times, and he has very good connections within the Conservative Party, as you would expect. And he wrote a column a couple of months ago devoted to Theresa May, and in it he more or less said what we were all thinking. This is a woman who can't speak to people, who finds it difficult to speak to people, who sticks to an agenda and is completely and utterly unbending of seeking anything approaching consensus, and will simply not listen, will put her hand up and not listen to anything that might mean a little bit of movement here and there, and next to no personal skills, and how she has exasperated even those quite close to her, even those quite well inclined to her. And he was more or less saying, whether she's left or right or Conservative or Labour, somebody like this shouldn't be in government anyway, because they're psychologically, their character, and it's not to call them flaws because we're all different. But for this,
it's not leadership, is it?
For this specific job of leadership, she just doesn't have the makeup. I mean, neither have I, probably, but this was startling when you read it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we spoke earlier on about Boris, and allegedly he's one of the runaway favourites to be the next PM, according to a new poll. What do you think his chances actually are?
Well, yeah, as I was saying earlier, he appears to have. He's definitely got the backing of the constituencies, who have all fallen for the flop-haired kind of. I mean, I saw yesterday when he was being chased out of the house and his shirt tail was hanging underneath his jacket, and I thought, just for a few seconds, and I was having to correct myself for my own cynicism. I thought, that's artificial. He's done that. He's decided before he goes out. Everybody else kind of makes sure their shirts are tucked in. He's deliberately taken that out to convey this impression. Look at Boris. He doesn't really kind of. He doesn't bend the knee to conformity, and he's his own man.
But it is an act, and it's a deeply I mean, the Bojo the Clown thing. It's deeply cynical approach to politics, and when he gets stuck on a zip wire, it's a huge national cause for celebration rather than the public humiliation. That if it had been anybody else, it would have been. And I think we must never underestimate his cynical use of the media, cynical use of the sort of the act to gain popularity and gain what he wants. There is nothing in his approach to leadership that I see that's other than just a lust for power and a lust for control, and that terrifies me, quite frankly.
And obviously, Nicola Sturgeon has said that if Boris becomes PM, that would speed up independence. Do you share that sentiment, Maggie?
Well, I mean, I think that there's been so much that's happened with Westminster over the last 3 years, showing its utter incompetence, and the fact that somebody like Boris Johnson was one of the cheerleaders for all the lies that we know the Leave campaign told. We know they broke electoral law, and I can't help but share that view. Do Scottish people, does Scotland really want to be tied to this cynical type of politics, the cynical approach to not only sort of internal UK government, but his approach to his off-the-cuff comments that will cost a woman however many months or years of her life in prison because he couldn't be bothered to take care of how he says things. I think that's deeply worrying for our politics in Scotland, and I don't think Scottish people want to stand for that at all.
And I think what is worrying as well is, like, if it's not Boris, one of the other contenders is Esther McVey, who a tabloid journalist recently said would drive the poor to an early grave if they aren't already heading in that direction. She seems to be on the same vein as Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May. She seems to be that same mould. Could she actually be worse than these two?
Well, I think McVey, Johnson, Gove, any of them getting that job, based on what their cynical approach to politics, two, their deliberate participation in whipping up social division in England. Anything that we have seen prior to Brexit in terms of social division, in terms of the gap between rich and poor, those who have and those who have not, being wide, will get worse with those three. They will see somebody like Farage and say, well, look, we're not like him. We're actually quite moderate Tories. But let's face it, Pol Pot could stand in front of Farage and say, well, I'm quite moderate, compared to him. So they will, if any of them getting that, will say, look, we're moderate. We're not Nigel Farage, we're not UKIP, but they're going for the same vote. They will stop at nothing to increase the social divisions in England, and they will use Brexit, whether we're in Europe or we're out of Europe, it will be too many immigrants. It will be whipping up hostility against others. That has been the basis of the Conservatives' social policy over the last few years, and it's been exacerbated during Brexit. Will the Scottish people, including people who were considering voting for independence and at the last minute didn't in 2014, will that be sufficient for enough of them to be scared to vote for independence? I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that they'd look down in England, see the rhetoric of these people, the wretched rhetoric of these people, and the evidence of the social division, and say, look, yeah, of course independence is a risk. Of course, it's not going to be wine and roses from day one. But by God, do we want to remain in a union that's dominated by these people? Yeah, let's have independence and make the best of it. Can't be any worse than this.
Yeah. And obviously this week we've got the EU elections coming up, and you're standing as a candidate,
yes,
Maggie. So it's been kind of predicted that the SNP, the Greens and the Lib Dems will do quite well this time. What's your feeling?
Well, I mean, we've got what's it, 4 more days of campaigning, and in the Scottish Greens we're taking nothing for granted. But it's been really, I think, a positive campaign for the Greens. We've seen over the last few weeks people coming out and saying, yes, they're going to vote Green for the first time, because we are the only party offering a full prospectus of hope, not only of a way to tackle climate change, the climate emergency that we face with Greens across the continent. We're the only parties that have a very, very clear system of dealing with that, but also because they see that we are actually capable of putting forward a different type of politics. Greens have always stood for a more participatory approach to politics, including people more in day-to-day decision-making, including more democracy in our day-to-day lives, whether it's in our workplaces, in our schools, in our education institutions. And there's been discussion recently about citizens' assemblies and using citizens' assemblies to talk about a future for Scotland, either specifically on the climate emergency and how we deal with that, or on more general things. Citizens' assemblies have been core to how Greens have always wanted to approach politics and approach leadership in that way. Lead by bringing people with us, not by dictating to people. And I think it's a couple of polls that we've had for the European elections this last week have been very encouraging for us.
The YouGov one put you ahead of the Lib Dems, Labour and Tories. So,
and I think we have a real opportunity here. If elected on Thursday, I will be Scotland's first ever Green MEP, and I think there's a breakthrough moment that we can see in the same way as electing our first ever Green MP in Caroline Lucas to Westminster. That changed the nature of not only Green politics in England and Wales, but of Westminster politics. Having a Green voice in there was really, really important. Electing Scotland's first ever Green MEP can do the same for Scottish politics, but also for how we relate to the European Union. And I'm up for that. I'm very much looking forward to it.
So what are you finding?
Thank you.
What are you finding on the doorsteps, Maggie, in terms of, I have heard, a couple of things over and over again. It's one is, what's the point of voting? And the other one is, people are just so confused, so fed up. They've shut down,
what's
basically.
Going on? Yeah.
What's been your kind of response to that in the doors?
I think people say around the confusion and around what's the point. I think in some ways these are the first European elections that I've been involved in that we're actually talking about Europe, which is a good thing. Let's talk about how we can use our voices in Europe to make it a better institution, make the EU a better, more democratic institution, more responsive to the needs of its communities, knowing that communities in the north of Scotland are going to have very different needs to communities in the Mediterranean, for instance. But let's actually use these elections as a way of changing our politics. And I think that's a message that is getting through to people and a message that people are wanting to hear. So, we are saying no to the Yaboo politics of Westminster. We're standing on a positive case to create a Europe transformed, a Europe that's not only able to deal with the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced in climate breakdown, but that can transform our economy, create an economy that puts people first. We know that we're in the mess we're in, our political mess as well as our climate mess, because of our economic system. We can't just tinker around the edges of it. It's created inequality. It's created it's sown the seeds of climate breakdown. We need to change our economy, and it's only Greens working with our sister parties across the continent in our Green New Deal plan that can change that. So we see not only in Scotland a swing to and a rise of support for the Greens, but across Europe there's a poll that put the Green parties above all the other groups, because I think people are taking these issues seriously. The old parties, the old politics cannot deal with the crises we face. We need something new, we need something fresh, we need something different, and that difference is the Greens.
And what do you think, Kevin, in terms of the turnout? What do you predict? I mean, obviously, I don't think EU elections have ever been that great. Well, no. A lot of elections have never been that great about turnout. What do you think?
I think it'll be higher. I think it'll be significantly higher than normal for EU elections, although, that's saying there'll be broom cupboard to a telephone box, normal circumstances. But I think because of I think people are much more aware, they couldn't not be, of some of the main issues at stake here because of Brexit. I think that people will probably vote along more tribal lines. I wonder, the Conservatives in Scotland haven't had a manifesto, but they had a launch, didn't they? And, you know, it was all about no referendums. You know, go, what's this got to do with Europe?
Yeah.
But it's what I would have predicted of Ruth Davidson, because, and it goes back to what I was saying about the Tories being the most tribal party ever, and divisive party ever, is that the Tories did quite well at the council elections a couple of years ago, and won seats that they probably didn't even know existed until recently in the East End of Glasgow, where most of them would probably need a sat-nav to get into. And they did it by, again, wrapping themselves in the Union Jack and stirring up some of the tribal tensions in those communities that we all know about. And they will do the same in Europe. And I suppose in England, Farage is getting his numbers because of that as well. And he's preying on some very, very questionable, sinister undercurrents that have begun to emerge in English politics over the last couple of years based around immigration. So it will be, I think it'll be a higher turnout, much higher turnout. Will it have any kind of, have any resonance or bear any, have any consequences for the Scottish election in 2021? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. I think actually, from what I'm hearing, I think the Greens are being seen as running a good campaign. They've been seen as a kind of, in some ways, as the honest brokers. I think also the very vivid warnings on climate change following Sir David Attenborough's interview, where even sort of people who weren't really engaged in this and turned it off and said, well, you know, no matter what we do, China, it's what China does that really kind of makes sense. So what does Little Britain have to do with it? But I think a lot of people are having their consciences pricked about our collective responsibility to the environment and also the creatures that we share this earth with. And I think that the Greens, not just in this election but generally, if they can use that and deploy that message properly, I think there's rich pickings for the Greens in future elections.
Well, I certainly hope so, obviously, but I think it's an important point to make in these elections, particularly because we know that, you know, the climate doesn't respect geopolitical boundaries. Species don't respect geopolitical boundaries. We need international action on this, and the European Union, for all its flaws, can act as a strong voice, if enough Greens are elected, as a strong voice for concerted continental action on this that can help bolster similar action elsewhere around the world. And I think that's something that is certainly very much central to our message in these elections. It is because the European Union can act as a European Union on climate breakdown that we need Greens in there, because we only have 11 years left. You know, we heard earlier this week koalas are functionally extinct because of climate change, because of climate breakdown, because of, you know, drought and very, very dry conditions in Australasia. And that hasn't happened by accident. That's happened because of human choices over the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And we have 11 years to act.
Rooted in greed and capitalism,
Absolutely.
let's say here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is our economic system that is the root cause of all of this.
So, I heard some chatter earlier on this week saying that if a large number of anti-EU MEPs get elected, that they will be in there to disrupt the Parliament and do their best to try and block things happening. Do you think that's feasible, or would there not be enough numbers really to?
Well, I mean, we heard that 5 years ago when UKIP got more MEPs elected than it had before. We know, you know, the anti-EU parties, they have no interest in being there. the fact that they're standing to take salaries is, I think, ridiculous and immoral, quite frankly. But they've no interest in being there, and I think it's beholden on those of us who want to be part of something bigger than ourselves to transform society, not only in Scotland, but transform society across the European continent and indeed across the world, that we work together and that we look for consensus where there is consensus, and there will be, across the different political groupings, there will be things that we can work on together, but we also need to make sure that there are strong voices there standing up against austerity, standing up for real action to tackle climate breakdown, and standing up against the rise of the far right, and saying, actually, we reject racism, we reject xenophobia. That's not part of the Europe we want to belong to. It's not part of the community or part of our culture, and we stand in solidarity with people regardless of their origin or skin colour.
And just quickly touching on, obviously it was the Australian elections yesterday, and they have had 6 prime ministers since 2007, and not one single one of them has run their full term. So you kind of look at that and you're thinking, well, actually, we're not the only country at the moment that's in a bit of a political crisis, and it seems that the Scott Morrison managed to pull it out of the bag, although he was running behind in the polls right up until the election. Do you think that there's similarities going on across globally, because there's a load of stuff going on with a right wing rise in Europe as well? Is there is democracy in danger globally because of what's going on?
I wouldn't say democracy is in danger. I think that there's I think that the weaknesses in democracy, and democracy is the best thing we have. Nobody's ever claimed that it's the panacea to all evils until we kind of discover another way. Although, as you were saying earlier, you can tweak democracy.
There are different ways of doing it, aren't they?
The voting system. I totally agree with you there. But I think you've got the rise of Trump and his kind of chief operator across the globe, Steve Bannon, who seems to be getting funded by the Lord knows who, to crisscross the globe to search out people of like-mindedness, like minds to him, Trump, and also what they stand for and with the values that they stand for. And you see it reaching into even some of the most unlikely spheres. For instance, in the Catholic Church, there's a battle between right and left, between those who are backing Pope Francis's reforms and teachings on same-sex marriage, on climate change, and wanting to have much more transparency over child sex abuse. And then you've got an extreme hard right wing who are actually, in fact I was saying this to somebody yesterday, the cry of no Pope of Rome. You won't hear at orange marches as much as you'll hear within parts of the Catholic Church who hate Francis because he wants to liberalise it. And then you see the shadow of Bannon, who's a Catholic and who wants to turn the Catholic Church into an ecclesiastical branch of UKIP almost. And so when he and people who back him are, they're looking across the globe, they're looking at the most influential parties, the people with money, and the people with money want to, I know this sounds like a lesson in Marxism, but it's not, it's fairness. What do they want to do? They want to ensure that there is a system in place which best protects their money and involves them giving as little of it, or being made to give as little of it away as possible. People might call it tax evasion. There are thousands of ways of doing that, and the easiest way is to get in a government which adheres to your ideals. Us pulling up the ladder, no to too many people, cracking down on people who are getting a bit curmudgeonly, building private armies, gaining power over the means of communication, all of that. And I think that's what we're seeing, and I think in Australia, he got in because he wasn't destined to get in. But Australia is a deeply, deeply conservative country, which up until very recently had overt anti-black laws. And when I say up until recently, I mean up until the 1990s.
Yeah.
And there's if you've gone to Melbourne, they've got a fantastic race museum. But some of the things when you walk around it, I mean, you have this kind of experience. I've never been to the Holocaust Museum, which I want to do. But you see these things about Australian society and artefacts, and from a museum visit, it's good, but my God, it's depressing.
Yeah.
And I was told by people there that they felt they had to build this to show people that this is the way, that this isn't good, what we've been doing as a country. Yeah. This isn't the way the rest of the world sees it, because Australia's it's the other end of the world quite literally, and Australians feel that they're kind of cut off, and when you are cut off, then it's easy to infect the body with really bad ideas, but it's also easy to spread good messages and messages of hope. But unfortunately, this fella seemed to get in with some quite negative messaging around immigration.
And it has been that stoking up of fear and hate around immigration and around people of colour in Australia that I think has led to Scott Morrison holding on, albeit with a very, very narrow margin. But I think it's also because the Labour Party tacked to the centre again, and it's, we've seen time and time again when the left triangulates, when the left tacks to the centre, they get torn apart, and it's something that I think all of us who care about social justice, who care about promoting equality, we need to bear that in mind in our own politics. But I think it's also interesting, you talked about Trump and what's happened, some of the things that have happened in North America. We see the likes of Bernie Sanders and AOC being much, much more powerful now, being real, serious contenders in a way that 5 years they just wouldn't have been. And I think, so coming back to your question about, is our democracy in crisis? Well, in some ways, yes. But the response to that, I've actually been quite heartened by, because it is people saying, we've had 40 years of a political system tied to an economic system that is set to divide. It is determined to divide, it is determined to make more unequal. And actually, no, we've had enough. And if people are given the opportunities and the possibility of something different or something positive that isn't about self-sacrifice, isn't about loss, but it can be positive, then they think, actually, yes, there is hope there is possibility here. And in the same way as we see in Europe, yes, we see some of that far-right, racist, anti-immigrant sentiment very, very strongly and very disturbingly. We also see Greens doing very well, the left doing better, because actually we do offer hope. We offer not only an alternative to that very tribal and unappealing politics, but we offer something different for our communities, for our economy, and for society as a whole. And I think that's what gives me hope every day, is that when people are given the opportunity to hear about something different, to be part of something different, and it's that engagement and involvement that's crucial. It's about being part of building a better world. They generally leap at the opportunity and grasp it with both hands, because it's for everybody. And I was struck. I saw a headline. I didn't read the article, partly because it's behind a paywall, but the headline was in the Telegraph that Jeremy Corbyn needs to stop with his narrow obsession on inequality. If a politician has to be obsessed about anything, surely inequality is one of the best things to be obsessed about. And it's getting down to telling people why the left actually has alternatives that are not only good for people, regardless of where in the world you are, but good for our environment and good for our planet too, and the other species that we share this world with.
And talking about the environment, you're probably aware, Maggie, the World Health Organisation recently said that air pollution is a public health emergency. We are experiencing damage to every organ and cell in the human body, according to this new study. Do you think that the public actually realise the potential harm, or is it that they don't care, or is it that they are just so many people are just so busy trying to survive that they can't think about all this other stuff going on?
I think there's a lot of that. You know, there's people are struggling to survive. People who are working sometimes 3 or 4 jobs are still having to rely on food banks, and in the 21st century, quite frankly, that's an obscene disgrace. But I think there is also something we know, in the same way as we saw with the tobacco industry in the 60s and 70s. They funded research to say that actually no, tobacco wasn't damaging to health, tobacco was fine and everything. We've had exactly the same thing. We've had oil and gas companies, the biggest polluters on the planet, funding research to say not only is climate breakdown not happening, but actually you don't need to worry about this air pollution nonsense, it's fine. So, you know, and we know when policies that the Greens and others support, you know, things like free public transport, encouraging people into cleaner forms of travel, into mass forms of travel. That's not only good for climate emissions, but actually it substantially reduces air pollution. It substantially increases people's health. People suffer less from cardio and respiratory disorders and problems. And you know, it's something I think the British Heart Foundation has done a lot of work in the UK over the last couple of years trying to raise awareness of this. But when you've got oil and gas and other companies fueling research that says the opposite, or fueling the media, as you said earlier, Kevin, you know, that just disregards this, that's a problem. And that comes back to democracy in some ways. How do we design our society in a way that these messages get out to people in a clear and honest form, and not everything is manipulated by money, by power, and that's something that, you know, I think the World Health Organization report shows in a variety of different ways. We've had this information for quite a long time, and yet we've not done anything with it because, in many ways, we can't, because our society is so tightly controlled by the rich that it's not in their interests, because they can always afford the healthcare to get treatment for these things. It is the less well off. It's the poorer people who will suffer the most, and quite frankly, they don't care. So it requires a change in our politics, a change in how we navigate these things as a society to take them seriously. And I think, you know, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Green, but Greens have ways of doing this. Other parties on the left do this as well, and we really need to be much more vocal about the possible alternatives of a different way of living, different way of doing politics, different way of doing transport. All of these things we need to talk about these things much more in a much more coherent way.
Yeah. Another news item this week I wanted to touch on is the Grenfell publication, which has been delayed, and obviously campaigners are protesting about this. It should have been published in the spring. They're now saying October. You know, they're saying basically 6 months after the hearing and hearing all our evidence to the inquiry, there's not been one single recommendation. Kevin, this must be just truly upsetting for family and friends that were involved, but also for the wider implication of the recommendations to make the places safer for people going forward.
It's yet another indication of how the elite, and by the elite I'm by no means just talking about the Tories here, treat those they consider beneath them with contempt. You know, if you were being cynical, you would say, well, the more delays that there are, the more people will forget the original causes of the fire. The pattern of social deprivation coupled with, again, political contempt for the types of people who live in this type of housing. They're hoping the longer we get away from the day of that awful fire, the more other things will come up and cloud people's memories of Brexit, for instance. we're never more than a few months away from, you know, another terror outrage, change of government, and just bit by bit people, I think you'd made the point earlier, Maggie, just in another context, but you know, people have their own concerns, their own troubles, their own challenges, and you just wonder that, you know, the people who disproportionately influence the way that we live and control our society, if this is just another of their artifices, just buys them a bit more time, because you're thinking, you know, this is they've had plenty of time to think about this.
Yeah.
It's not as if the recommendations or what they would have chosen to recommend are going to be a surprise to anybody. We most of us kind of know why this happened. I mean, yeah, you can place it in the context of our attitude towards, you know, a hostile environment, Windrush generation, these people being considered third, fourth class citizens. But we know roughly why the fire happened. We've seen the consequences. To a certain degree, the government moved fairly quickly, and other polities, to start inspecting other buildings of that nature, and to bring in emergency legislation to stop that sort of cladding. So you think, what, really, this is okay? It was one full-time, very experienced judge. But if the people who run the country really wanted to have met that deadline, knowing roughly what they were wanting, the areas they were going to legislate on and the recommendations, you just throw all resources at it.
Yeah.
You overload it with assistants, with researchers, with other lawyers, with lawyers who are specialists in that area of housing law, of race relations, inequality. You just overload it. This is a national, UK-wide, Europe-wide outrage.
Yeah.
So it's unacceptable, and my heart goes out to those victims and their families.
It does just seem like those people who have suffered, the victims, they don't matter. That's what this delay says. Yes, it's politically handy, I think, for the government to kick this into the long grass again. But really what it's saying is, you don't matter. Actually, we don't care about you. We don't give a damn, because your lives aren't worth, what we think, what we value. And that's a pretty appalling situation.
They know they can get away with it. There was a column written by Polly Toynbee of The Guardian a few weeks ago, and she'd visited a couple of years ago a food bank in Liverpool, and she went back to it at the start of the end of the Brexit process, and the chap who's managing the food bank said, what's happening to Britain? Because whereas before people would give food readily, now they're still wanting to give food, but they're saying, who's getting it?
That's just...
What sort of people are getting it? And his response was always hungry people.
Hungry people, yeah.
So in that atmosphere, they know they can get away with pushing this back, because those same attitudes were, they're immigrants. They're probably not working. They're probably cheating the system. We saw 3 people or 2 people go to jail for holding a bonfire with images of. That's a sickness. That's not. Yeah. That's an infection.
Yeah. You spoke earlier on about endangered species, Maggie, and I just want to touch on a debate that happened in Westminster Hall this week. It was around trophy hunting, and also this week was like Endangered Species Day. So in terms of lions, we have less than 15k in the wild, and only 4 of them are viable populations. And the strange thing is they're not actually even enlisted as an endangered species. I wonder if people are still aware of the kind of trophy. I mean, originally years ago it was all about the ivory, and ivory was stopped, but actually it hasn't. No. And I think there's lots of people out there who still think that this doesn't happen anymore. It's been, it's been dealt with. It's not allowed. But actually, that's not the truth. It's still going on, and I just find it difficult to understand why people want to kill animals in the first place, but then bring them back here as a big trophy of, we've all seen the social media pictures of people holding up a big lion instead of a rifle, and you're just like, again, it's about globally the kind of world we want to live in.
It makes me sick. It really, really does. I mean, I was born and brought up in Zimbabwe, and it's to think that what the thought that goes through your head if you look at, you know, an elephant roaming on the savannah, or whatever animal it is, that, yes, I know what I want to do. I want to put a bullet through that animal's head. What does that say about your humanity? Never mind anything else. You know, I find that deeply, deeply sickening. And I think we've got a lot of work to do to, as you say, to make people much more aware that, yes, this does go on, and ultimately what it comes down to is greed. Mm-hmm. You know, it happens because there's an industry that supports it. Mm-hmm. You know, the hunting industry is phenomenally wealthy in many of these countries, and it's not about promoting. You know, it's not, oh well, people say, oh, it promotes tourism and that kind of thing. There are so many other ways that we can promote positive tourism. That's actually about nurturing animals that we share. We share the planet that we share these countries with, rather than killing them to stick up on a wall. It's just ridiculous, and it strikes me that the people, so many people who want to engage in this type of activity, I kind of, well, what's missing in their lives? What is it about them that they feel they need to go and show how powerful they are by, you know, using a very, very expensive weapon to gun down an animal that can only try and outrun it?
I think you know, the organisation Lion Aid, they try very hard to talk to the UK government to bring in a ban, and obviously there's a ban in France, there's a ban in Australia. Yeah. It's not difficult to do, but I think it possibly links to a bit about what you said earlier on, Kevin, about who's controlling it, who's got the money.
Exactly. So
if it's people with money influencing governments, to be able to say, yeah, don't do that because it's going to affect our industry.
You know, the UK government has so far found it impossible to even warn or threaten the Saudis for chopping the heads off women for having the wrong kind of sex with the wrong people at the wrong time, whatever. So we can't use what influence we have with one of our major allies to stop torturing and slaughtering its own people. Then what hope do we have of getting them to with other European countries and saying, if you don't stop this, if you don't start making serious moves to grow or to save these beasts, then we'll do something about it. But you know they won't, because it's power and it's money. And I also wonder, I don't know how true this is or how statistics back up the research, but somebody who's prepared to kill in cold blood an animal, defenceless, let's face it, utterly defenceless. They're talking about lions here, they're big, they're defenceless when it comes
against
to
a
gun, and people have been preparing for it for 2 weeks. These people, I think, and I've seen it to a limited experience in my own life, have similar, cruelty towards human beings. It doesn't just stop at animals, and it coincides with the rise of the far right across the world that we were talking about. Well, it infects humane behaviour, of what we once considered to be humane behaviour. And if you can, if you get Donald Trump and the people who fund him and support him, who promote that sort of activity of killing lions, then you're thinking, what will they stop at when it comes to torturing humans?
Who was it who said you can judge the humanity of a country by the way it treats its animals? And not only if we're talking about hunters and that kind of trophy hunting, but earlier we saw the Tory government sign away any sort of sense that animals can feel pain in legislation. Really? Anybody who's ever had a cat or a dog as a pet knows that animals feel pain, and I think the mark of our government, how it's going to treat its humans, is reflected in that, exactly as you say, and that's a government I want absolutely nothing to do with.
Our final item today, guys, we'll just touch on the Jeremy Kyle show, couldn't speak there. Now obviously it was axed this week after tragically the death of a contestant, and that's had a huge impact in the particular social media and the news about, you know, that these programmes are almost making money out of human misery and particularly targeting vulnerable people. Kind of what is the point of these shows, and really should we be having this type of show on TV?
I can't believe that in the 21st century it's taken the death of a vulnerable person, let's face it, an emotionally vulnerable person, to take this show off.
No.
Again, keep coming back to it, it's money.
Yeah.
You know, the salary that Jeremy Vine is on, it's 34,000 a week, I think it was reported. If that is what he's on, you can only guess at how much money that programme makes. And it, you know, there's no two ways of putting it. This is a human zoo. This is middle class, affluent, smart kids, smart people who realise that people with challenges in their life, economic challenges in their life, will encounter more mental health challenges in their life as a result of that. And they thought, we can monetise that, because these people, you know, will be dazzled by television. It will take them out of the pattern of misery that they live in, their neighbourhoods, and in that situation we can manipulate them for titillation. It's a human zoo, it's bear baiting, and I hope somebody starts talking about criminal charges being brought against them, you know, are being investigated against that programme, and also some of the things that were said to this bloke after he left, or when he was leaving the programme, because if some of those remarks that purported to come from some certain individuals that were targeted at him, if I was his family, I'd be saying, I want a knock at his door.
There's culpability there, isn't there? And it's cruel. It's cruel exploitation, and as you say, just for laughs, for money, and we shouldn't be tolerating any of these kinds of programmes. That shouldn't be what we spend money on our media for. You know, our media should be there to engage, to inform. Let's have robust debate, let's have discussion, let's talk about difficult issues, but not in an exploitative way.
There's half a dozen.
Yeah, there are loads of them, aren't there?
Programmes of the same ilk that, you know.
Well, we had the 2 deaths linked to the Love Island programme, and obviously it's still going. Is it time then maybe we should be looking at an overall review of these types of programmes? And
absolutely.
Even the I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. You know, just because you're a celebrity and you might have a bit of money, it doesn't prevent you from mental health issues, depression. In fact, you could argue that celebrities and people who are in the public eye may be more prone to mental health issues. So that is a programme that is hoping, let's face it, over those episodes, it is hoping that 2 or 3 of those individuals will show overt signs of mental breakdown of some, because that's what makes that. If they had 12 celebrities or 12 ordinary people going into the jungle and all behaving well and all behaving communally and inclusively and helping each other, and there's nice outcomes at the end, well, I mean, it wouldn't even last 4 episodes, would it? But we're now into God knows how many series, because they know that people will have some
it's selling
type
human
of
misery,
mental breakdown for us all to watch, and it's. I would just go as far as to say it's evil.
So if you were in charge of broadcasting, what programmes would you want to see more of? What would you like?
More like this, obviously, with people like us. And football.
No, but I mean, I think genuinely there are, you know, really interesting people-centred discussion programmes that we can have. Let's have honest discussions about mental health. You know, let's talk to people, but in supportive and safe environments, not in victimising and bullying and harassing environments. That doesn't do it.
I love the new. I wrote about this week. I love the new Scotland channel on the BBC.
I've been really.
I wasn't prepared. I thought I'm not going to like this, but they're holding up a mirror to Scotland that I like, that Scotland looks good in. Minorities, you know, there was a programme about Glasgow's underground transvestite nightlife. I thought, I'm not going to like this. It was amazing. Mirror, mirror, hairdressers talking to ordinary people about sex, religion, politics in the way that we all like to talk about it.
Yeah.
Young people and their preferences and their fears and their challenges. That's the sort of some of those programmes are the sorts of life-affirming programmes that we've been waiting on for years, and I do wish it well, even though the BBC drives me around the twist at times. I do wish the Scotland Channel, I think they're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, we need to move away from this sort of sensationalism, and everything has to be, a huge drama. Let's just actually talk about life, as you say, hold a mirror up and talk about the Scotland we have and the Scotland we want to have.
And I think that's what we're trying to do here at Broadcast Scotland. But that's all we've got time for today, guys. So I would really like to thank Kevin and Maggie for coming in, and good luck with the campaign, Maggie.
Thank
you will catch us during the week at Scotland at 7, and we hope to see you next Sunday next Sunday in the Full Scottish, but also we'll have an election programme this week too, so look out for that.